Welcome back to today's edition of Today's Wave. I'm your host, Tolly Wilgus, and as you know, here at Today's Wave, we're really focused on the fact that waves, they're kind of neutral. They can crash into the shore, or they can bring about some calm. And if you're sitting on the beach, that's a great, peaceful place to be. But a lot of this depends on your perspective. We're trying to bring you some better perspectives on life so that when that next wave comes, it doesn't come against your shores and crash, but it's something that you can ride. And today, the person that's going to help guide us in and ride us in is going to be my friend, Curtis Zackery. Curtis is a sought-after speaker and author. He's a pastor at Church of the City in Franklin, and he served in various leadership capacities for 15 years. He's my friend from college, and he's the author of Soul Rest, Reclaim Your Life, Return to Sabbath. How you doing, Curtis?
Man, it's exciting to be with you, brother. I'm excited.
Man, I'm glad that you took some time out of your Corona schedule to be with us
That's right.
today. So I think when we talk about rest, period, you and I were talking before we started taping that I just really feel like whether people wanted to or not, they're ready to consume what you have to offer in terms of rest. Because I think when you put your book out, it's in the middle of all of the hustle and bustle and the speed of society. But now we're in a place where we're forced to rest. And so I really feel like you could be a good guide for us to help us focus on these last couple of weeks, hopefully, of just what can we take out of this certain circumstance. So would you mind describing just a little bit about what you mean by soul rest?
Yeah, I think rest is one of those words that we either have a sense of longing for or almost a resentment against. There's this, I think, misnomer connected to rest where we equate rest with laziness, and that keeps us from finding rest in a regular rhythm. So a lot of us connected to, just like you were saying, this idea that we're always going, we're working to prove, to show, to bring value to our own life or our investment into the world, whatever that looks like in any respect. When we think about rest, it almost feels like a failure of our ability to offer something out. And so it's me now opting out of what is expected of me to give out into the world, where when we look at the reality of what rest means, it's this ability to recoup and to replenish and to restore your ability to actually offer something of substance out into the world. So like that's a very basic idea connected to rest. But when I talk about soul rest, I think I even move beyond just that simple premise. I think that by itself is already helpful to kind of get us out of a way of thinking about rest. But then there's this other kind of rest, which is a deeper layer. It's not just a vacation. It's not taking a nap. It's not just taking a break. But there are anxieties, stresses, worries that are deep, ingrained way deep down inside of us. And they have to do a lot with our identity, our value, and our worth, our perceptions of those things. And what I ultimately am talking about inside of the book is that there is this ability and I think true longing that we have built into us to find a type of rest that transcends that surface rest. And that soulish rest, I believe, comes from a connection and understanding of knowing who God is and what that means for our lives.
That's awesome. I appreciate that so much. When you and I knew each other ancient days ago,
That's
Curtis, when you and I knew each other, I remember when you were writing this material, and I thought rest. I was like, I don't think of Curtis and rest in the same picture. And so I'm sure there was a awareness that came to you throughout life that just said, man, that's not what I want. Because you were the guy that I'd look at in, football and in popular and social and out there and always going and loving people and caring about people and what they thought and things like that. Can you walk us through maybe the contrast on kind of in your own soul, what kind of caused this to come to the top? Maybe we could recognize ourselves in some of it.
Yeah, I think definitely, like you just alluded to, it's been a long journey. I mean, as long as I can remember, my identity, worth, and value have been connective to what I do. And when I say what I do, it's not necessarily a platform-based way of thinking to where you're in front of a lot of people, but just what you offer out into the world, I think, can easily become what you ascribe your personal value to. And so you just alluded to this idea of knowing a lot of people, kind of being outgoing, whether it's in athletics or I used to do music stuff and all these different things. Like my identity, worth, and value being interwoven into all of those things have these inherent benefits connected to it. The only problem is the reality of maintaining that sense of connectivity to those things as my identity, worth, and value are not sustainable. It just takes too much energy. It takes too much of what I have to offer into the world to be able to keep that up. And I think for me, an intersection came where my wife and I had moved to a city called Richmond in California, which is just on the other side of the bridge of San Francisco. And we were doing some really purposeful and meaningful work for God. I think everything we were doing was, I would say, really directed and founded on this idea of bringing the message of the kingdom of God into the world and helping other people. And so all the work we were doing was really good work for God. It was purposeful. The only problem was I was doing all this work for God, and I'm not really sure I was doing a lot of work with God. And that was a real sense of awareness, because I just knew for me to keep doing the types of things we were doing, which was like working with homeless folks or people who are in recovery situations or coming out of prison or coming out of sex trafficking. Like we were doing all these good, purposeful things, but I just didn't see how I could sustain the type of engagement that was necessary. People would come to our house at 3 a.m. and, you know, it's just like 24/7. So just recognizing how much of that good work I was doing was really founded in my own abilities. And then I think another thing that accentuated that was my wife and I experienced loss through miscarriage. And I think just recognizing some of the deep pain and grief that came not only from the first time, but the second time being further into the pregnancy, and just recognizing how much angst I had rise to the surface just to go, man, I'm doing all of this for God, and yet this happens in my life, you know? And then the third piece that kind of really brought it home was we felt like we were alone. Like we had a lot of people around us, but all the people who are around us would say things like, well, you're the guy that we would normally talk to if we were in trouble, so we don't know what to say. So I think it's those three things, honestly, that have converged together and brought me to a place to go, man, something needs to change. The old way of thinking that you were referring to just isn't sustainable. And I just want a new rhythm. I want to find rest. I don't want it to be something that I'm always living in this wheel of anxiety for the rest of my life.
Man, the wheel of anxiety you talk about in your role now, as I understand it, you spend your time publicly teaching and proclaiming, but you spend also a lot of time in private and dealing with people one-on-one. Just in our society of people trying to find their worth and meaning and value through what they do, are there any indicators that you've discovered over time, like working with people, to just say, man, if I hear these kind of language, if I hear people say this, then I feel like we need to hone in on this area of rest for them? Like, what are some indicators maybe that we should be thinking about? If these thoughts or words are coming off of our lips, then maybe we need to really reconsider rest.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones you just said a couple times right there. Like I was having this conversation one time with an older guy. He's in his late 60s and was kind of sharing some of this place of angst around what I was recognizing and just some things that I was kind of processing. And I was saying things like, you know, I don't really know how I can sustain, you know, our family, and I don't know what I need to be doing so that I can lead, and I don't know and he just stopped me, and I'm abbreviating as much as I just went on, and he just basically said, do you realize how many times you said the word I in reference to provision and connection in your life? And I didn't, you know, I just had become so sufficient on my own abilities being the thing that is the driver, being the thing that produces insight, being the thing that builds, you know, a way into the world. And he was saying, I get that you have these gifts. I get that you have these abilities, but you need to recognize that you're carrying a lot of angst and anxiety because you're seeing yourself as your sole provision. And even though you talk about God, you're not living from that place of connectedness. So one of the biggest ones I really do think when I'm having conversations is recognizing how often the word I, connective to provision, connective to advancement, connective to blessing even, is peppered in. Another one that I think is really important is when we're honest and we see the levels of enjoyment that come connective to what it means to be not only with and around people, but also in reference to the things that we've always found joy in the past. Like when we stop, and this is the value and the beauty of rest, and you were talking about a forced rest, and we could talk some more about that, but when you come to a point of forced rest, you have to start taking assessment and becoming aware of what is currently true. And when we give ourselves the chance to stop and you recognize, wait, like, I don't really find joy anymore in the things that I used to. I don't really laugh as much as I used to. I don't really find enjoyment being around people as much as I used to. And they may seem like surface things. For some people, they're going like, I can't relate with that. But I think there's other people who are listening to this who, if they're honest, right now are starting to see some of these things come to the forefront. And they're going, man, well, I see that that's changed. Well, what do I do about that?
That is good. That is good. You talked about the forced nature of this for a lot of us. You had the privilege of, I don't know if you call it a privilege, but you had the opportunity to kind of land here and to take some time to get to this place. What do you have to say for the state that we're in right now? As we record this, we're in the middle of the coronavirus crisis, and most people are locked down. And man, the party stopped abruptly. So what do you say to people that are hitting that forced wall of rest right now? Is there a way we could divert our attention and divert our hope a little bit instead of mourning over what's been lost, but actually build from here?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to say before even responding to that, like the on-ramp into this is terrible. Like this is not the way that we
Well, thank you, Curtis. I appreciate the interview.
That's right. But I just think it's important because I will start saying some positive things about this time, but I want to make sure before I say any of that it's not missed at all. You know, sickness and death, like this is terrible how we've gotten here. I think what I've been talking a lot with a lot of leaders about is, although that's the case, and we have been presented with this terrible situation that's provided our current reality, the question now becomes, how do we steward what is before us? Like, how do we now look at what's in front of us and say, now that it's here, what do we do with it? And I think the word that you just used, kind of diverting our attention, is one thing. I think what I would say is more kind of channeling some of the energy and really directing it into a place where we can use that idea of stewardship. When it comes to money, that word stewardship is so easily identifiable in our situation. We go, man, I have this in front of me. I don't want to waste it. I don't want to be frivolous with it. I want to invest it the way that I can when there's a purposeful way to do it. If we can look at time in the same way, I think we can begin to grow in similar senses where I have this in front of me. I don't want to waste it. I want to invest it in ways that are purposeful. And I think with this forced rest that we have, the biggest gift that is so super obvious, but also needs to be said, is this chance for a reset. And reset for so many people is something that we long for, especially in busy spaces. We're going, man, if I had more time, I would fill in the blank. Or, man, if I just had the chance and I had the space, I would fill in the blank. And what we start to recognize, and honestly, what is kind of troubling to some of us, is we have this time now, but yet we can't figure out how to start engaging all those things that we said we would always do if we had the time. And so what we start to recognize is the barrier to us channeling that energy into a productive place may be something that has more to do with us looking inward than it does with us looking outward. And so I think the greatest gift of what this reset represents is to start looking at ourselves and going, okay, what are the barriers for me to actually moving forward into the things that I know I need to be doing? And this sense for us to be able to stop is now presenting us, which is not necessarily an exciting prospect, to look inward and maybe discover things about ourselves that need to change. So I think that that's the thing that we can really, really steward in this time.
I heard somebody say last month I told myself my house would just be clean if I had more time. This month I found out that wasn't true. Time wasn't my issue. Hey, so when we talk about being locked in, shut in, I had a pastor friend said, Tali, we all just became pastors of shut-ins, and I thought that was so appropriate. But when we talk about this shut-in time or this forced rest time, one of the things I admire you about, you mentioned the miscarriages you had, but God's been gracious, and you've got a beautiful family, a wonderful family. Many of us are in now, and some people may be in smaller spaces or tighter spaces with their family. Would you speak a little bit on maybe some intentional channels, as you described, that we could build from here so that we're not the same people coming out of this as we were going in?
Yeah, I think it really is back to that idea of investment. Like, you're now given the opportunity to begin to sow seeds that will reap a benefit. And I think intentionality is the biggest word that we can pepper into our daily rhythms. If we can be intentional in every respect, it will allow us to be able to begin to build into some things that we hope to see happen when the ban is lifted, when the doors open again. Yeah. One of the things that we've tried to do here in our house is not from a sense of rigidity, but really out of a sense of intentionality, is really implement some structure into what our day looks like. So we want in that structure to provide time for my bride to get time for herself, for me to be able to do work and get time for myself, but also, more importantly, for us together as a family to really lean in to this great gift that we do have, which is extended amounts of time together as a family. Now, I say that because this is something for us that we are relishing in. There are others of us who, if we're being honest, are recognizing that maybe there are some hard places that we're recognizing in the rhythms of relationship, whether it's with our spouse or even with our kiddos. And so that same level of intentionality may not initially be this super flourishing and fruitful time, but it will be this opportunity to begin to look again at some of those barriers, some of those hard places, and go, okay, we're here. We're together. We're not going anywhere. Yeah. I don't want it to be this way, but maybe we can start to lean into some of the things and have some hard conversations. Maybe start doing some soul searching, maybe offering some apologies. But now is the time for us to sow the seeds that I think we're hoping to grow and to reap the harvest of later.
So good, so good. The structure is a word that a lot of us are afraid of. So when you mention that, it's important that we understand that we're not just going to magically become somebody different. There has to be some intentionality and some structure to it. When you're thinking that direction and you're trying to walk people through rest and see the value, okay, I'm here now. I'm ready to take this on. I'm ready to do some soul searching. Are there any practical patterns or habits or routines that you try to point people to begin to make that shift? Like if they were to leave off today and say, okay, it's it's contrary, like what do I do next? But is there anything that you would give people to say, you know what, just start here?
Yeah, I think there are three words that I kind of just lean on as a basis. And then from there, I think there's further conversation that can arise. The first one is what I already mentioned. It's intentionality. It's saying, I'm going to show up to the thing that I hope to see change. So if we're going, man, I want more rest. I want there to be structure. I want there to be a developed rhythm or a sustained, pathway of health and life. Like, I got to show up to it. I got to at least, say this is the thing that I'm going to do. And so that seems super basic, but it goes back to your example about cleaning the house. It's like, man, I need to at least show up to the party. Now, that's not to say that I'm going to get the house clean or it's going to be done the way I need to, but I'm at least there saying, I got my broom, I got my whatever. I'm ready I'm here. So I think intentionality is the first thing. And I would say for anybody who's looking to implement some new rhythms into their life, you need to write them down. You need to start with one. Just pick one simple thing that you're saying, I want to see implemented into my life. So the second word I always say is substantial. I think one of the things that I needed to learn is I'm good at the intentional thing. I can go, man, here's a thing that I want to do. Like, yeah, that's great. But I think like we all know, especially as leaders, and we've heard from other leaders, if you want to see substantial change, you need to make a substantial change. And so I think for some of us, that looks different than others. I'll give you an example for me. When I got into a place where I said, I want to intentionally show up to find restful rhythms in my life, a substantial change I made was for 2 years, I wasn't on social media. Now, for some people, they would say, well, that's not a reasonable response. Maybe that's not something I want to do. And that's okay. It's not about a right or wrong issue. I just knew that substantial change for me would reap substantial benefits. Now, the reason it was substantial for me, for those who would go, yeah, I don't even care about social media, it was substantial for me because I had just written a book. I had just entered into this new pathway where I need to be connecting to people. So to take that step was a big step. But I feel like the dividends that were paid were huge. And then the third word that I would say is sustainable. So a lot of us say, I'm going to show up, I'm going to do a thing. The second thing is, yeah, I'm going to make a substantial change to see substantial change. But how often have you said, I'm going to work out every day at 6 a.m., but then, you get about 2.5 weeks into that, if you get that far and you go, yeah, that's not going to happen, right? Because we're not thinking of things in terms of sustainability. So if we just take that little extra step to go, all right, I'm going to be intentional about this one thing. I'm going to make a substantial change, believe that it's going to be a substantial impact. But what can I see myself doing for the next 6 months, for the next 12? And one big question we can ask right now in this specific situation is, what can I see myself doing after the coronavirus has lifted and now we're able to get back into life? What can I see myself starting now that I can do a year from now? So those are 3 words that I think base it, but then there can be more practical conversation, and I don't want to take too much time.
No, I think that's terrific. Now, I'm a little bit... I take it personally. I don't know if you called my family or anything about my CrossFit habits for a couple of months there. So, I mean, you just kind of went personal there, Curtis. And I don't know, but I'm going to have to sit with that for a little while.
Yeah, I just put the mail in the mailbox, man. I don't know.
So, my wife's going to have this episode on loop. I can feel it now. Hey, so... Listen, Curtis, as you said, a lot of this revolves around more conversation. There's a lot of people that may not have picked up your book and understand. Could you just let us know how we can get a hold of you? And are you back on social media where people could follow along with your story?
Yeah, so back on social media, it was a beautiful respite. Who is CZ on any of the ones, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. And Soul Rest Book is the site, soulrestbook.com. If you want to find out more about the book, there's some, folks who've read it and can share a little bit more about it. One easy on-ramp, if you have the YouVersion app on your phone, I did a reading plan. And if you just search in plans, Soul Rest, there's a 7-day kind of activity you can work through that can kind of start you into some of this conversation. And it's a great way to kind of just stir up some of the things about what this can actually mean and look like for your life, and maybe start this conversation for your family. So those are a couple things. And I would love to continue the conversation.
Perfect. Curtis, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the character you have just as a man, apart from all the stuff you've ever done. You've always been a stand-up man who loves the Lord, loves people, and I really respect that and have appreciated it all these years. So thank you for taking time out of your day, and I'm looking forward to people linking up with you and following along on the journey. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks, brother.